The most consequential attacks of the last decade left no craters. They left corrupted firmware, falsified sensor readings, and industrial control systems that believed they were operating normally while doing nothing of the kind. The attack surface had moved from the physical to the logical, and Iran had been racing to develop that capability with the urgency of an adversary that had watched its physical military infrastructure be systematically threatened and had identified the logical domain as the one in which that disadvantage could be reversed. The facility the target folder described was that decision made physical. An underground complex 11 kilometers southwest of Mashhad, housing Iran's most capable offensive cyber operations unit. The organization, whose activities had been observed in the collection record for 6 years across the networks of American military installations, partner nation power grids, and industrial control systems throughout the region. The facility was not merely a computer center. Computer centers can be replicated. What had been built beneath the Mashhad highlands was a combined capability: offensive cyber operations development and execution on one side of the facility's internal architecture, and signals intelligence collection and processing on the other, two functions that the Iranian military had chosen to co-locate, not for economy of scale, but because the intelligence that signals collection produces feeds directly into the targeting decisions of offensive cyber operations. You cannot attack a network you do not understand. The signals intelligence function produced the understanding. The offensive operations function produced the attacks. Housing them together meant housing the institutional knowledge, the tool development pipelines, the access credentials that had been cultivated through years of patient network infiltration, and the operational infrastructure that connected the facility's cyber operators to the implants already positioned inside the networks of adversary and partner nation systems. Destroying the facility did not destroy the implants. It destroyed the operator's ability to command them. The target folder had required collection methods different from any previous target in the series. A cyber operations facility produces no electromagnetic signature that distinguishes it from any other computing infrastructure. The characterization required direct technical access to the facility's networks, access obtained through methods that will not be described, producing uniquely detailed intelligence, the organizational structure of the units it housed. The tool development pipeline, whose output had been observed in the wild for 6 years, and the infrastructure connecting the facility to the implants it commanded. When the decision was made to eliminate the infrastructure and the operators rather than the implants, the folder was complete. The depth was 46 meters in the consolidated granite basement that underlies the Mashhad highlands, the same granite formation that the Alborz missions had encountered in a different configuration, consistent in density with previous characterizations, without the karst variability of the Kark Island mission or the silty variability of the Semnan mission. The weapons engineers had assessed the fusing solution at 88% confidence. 12% was documented. The single weapon employment solution reflected a facility whose function made 2 weapons unnecessary. Unlike a production plant or a storage facility, whose contents could survive a weapon that missed its design depth, a command and operations node was comprehensively disrupted by any detonation in its vicinity that produced structural compromise and power loss simultaneously. The overpressure did not need to be inside the chamber. It needed to be close enough to the chamber that the transmitted loading exceeded the structural tolerance of the equipment racks, the server infrastructure, and the precision-cooled processing arrays that had been populated with a decade of tool development that could not be backed up off-site, because backing it up off-site created the kind of network traffic signature that would have revealed the facility's function to the collection programs watching for exactly that signature. The operators had chosen operational security over redundancy. The choice had protected the facility for 6 years. It had also ensured that when the facility was eliminated, everything inside it was eliminated with it. The operational context had been accumulating for 14 months. The facility's cyber unit had executed intrusions against American military logistics networks whose effects were limited, but whose scope and sophistication revealed a developing capability that, deployed against more critical systems, represented a threat the physical strike calculus had to weigh against the disruption its elimination would produce. The weighing produced the targeting decision. The B-2 Spirit, assigned to the mission, lifted off at 11:22 p.m. The routing to the Mashhad highlands from the forward operating location required 14 hours and 8 minutes, a flight profile whose length placed it in the category of extended duration sorties that the physiological management protocols were specifically designed for. The pilot had been on this aircraft for 17 years. The mission commander had been on it for 11. Both had done 14-hour profiles. Neither had done a 14-hour profile against a target whose elimination required the specific precision that the Mashhad facility's depth in granite and its proximity to civilian infrastructure demanded. The facility was in the highlands, 11 kilometers from a major city. The weapons employment solution had been computed to confine the detonation effects entirely to the subsurface. The surface above the facility, a plateau with sparse scrub vegetation and a maintained access road that served the facility's disguised surface entrance, was to show nothing. Not because the mission planners were concerned about surface infrastructure in the conventional sense, but because a visible surface event, 11 kilometers from a city with a population of 4 million, would produce the kind of observable signature that the mission's operational security requirements had designated as unacceptable. The tanker contact at 3:04 a.m. completed in 15 minutes over the northern Arabian Sea. The second contact at 11:41 a.m. east of the Strait placed the aircraft at its final fuel state with the margin the planning required. Both contacts were accomplished within the variance the coordination protocol accepted. The timing differential between the aircraft's current position and the initial point was on schedule. The Mashhad air defense sector presented a coverage architecture whose character reflected the city's status as a major religious and political center, not the purpose-built, hardened networks of the nuclear or missile facilities, but a defense that had been assembled over decades in response to the general threat environment. The long-range coverage came from a Bavar 373 battery positioned on the high ground north of the city, oriented to cover the western and northwestern approach corridors that an aircraft transiting from the Gulf region would use. The mission's approach was from the southwest, an azimuth that placed the aircraft at the edge of the Bavar 373's designed coverage sector, reducing its detection probability for the B-2's radar cross-section profile. The reduction was margin. The Growler EW package was sized against the full battery capability rather than the reduced sector probability, treating the favorable geometry as additional protection rather than reduced requirement. The inner ring coverage was provided by 2 Tor M1 batteries whose positions the target folder had established from imagery and signals collection. Both were at garrison positions, no readiness exercise, no rotation to field positions, no variation from their characterized locations. The land-based EW asset managing the inner ring suppression had been allocated against these positions with the confidence that previous missions had identified as the highest achievable. Characterized positions with confirmed current status from a collection pass 48 hours before the mission. The 48-hour currency window was the planning's accepted staleness threshold for inner ring position data. Both batteries were confirmed at their characterized positions. The EW allocation was precise. At 12:47 p.m. local time, 14 minutes before the planned initial point, the EW package activated against the Mashhad sector. The Bavar 373 began its frequency management response within 60 seconds, faster than the pre-mission modeled response time. Consistent with a battery operating at an elevated readiness state. The elevated readiness was not expected. The signals intelligence that fed the mission's planning had characterized the Mashhad sector's readiness posture as normal in the 48 hours preceding the activation. Normal did not mean static. The battery had elevated to heightened readiness at some point in the 14-minute window between the last pre-mission signals intelligence assessment and the EW package activation, for a reason that the collection had not captured. The faster frequency management response was the observable signature of the elevation. The EW officer on the Growler flight noted the 60-second response time and transmitted the observation to the planning element monitoring the mission. The planning element's assessment arrived on the data link 31 seconds later. Faster response time, characterized as consistent with an elevated readiness posture that did not affect the EW package's fundamental effectiveness against the Bavar 373. The package had been built against the battery's full capability. A battery at elevated readiness executing its full capability faster than modeled was still being suppressed against its full capability. The faster cycling rate reduced the suppression window per frequency interval, but did not eliminate the suppression. The assessment was correct. The mission commander logged it and continued. The Tor M1 batteries received their suppression cleanly from the initial activation. Both batteries were at their characterized positions. The land-based EW assets allocation was performing within its specified effectiveness range. At 12:53 p.m., 7 minutes before the initial point, the northern Tor M1 battery elevated its scan rate. Not a frequency shift, not a mode change, but a scan rate increase that the passive warning receiver characterized as consistent with an operational readiness cycle rather than a contact response. The battery was scanning faster without having seen anything. The faster scan rate was a readiness behavior, not a threat response. The mission commander noted it and assessed it as lower significance than the Bavar 373's elevated readiness indicator. Two systems elevated. Neither had generated a contact report. The elevated readiness pattern was consistent with a scheduled sector readiness check rather than a threat response. He continued. The readiness assessment changed at 12:57 p.m., 3 minutes from the initial point, when the Bavar 373's fire control radar activated in a directed search mode, the specific emission pattern that the passive warning receiver associated with a cued search rather than a routine sweep. Directed. The battery had received a cue from somewhere that had triggered a focused search on a bearing. The mission commander checked the bearing. The bearing was within 4 degrees of the approach vector. The fire control radar had been cued to search within 4 degrees of the bearing the aircraft was on. He ran the geometry while transmitting the priority allocation code to the Growler flight. The Growler's maximum output reached the Bavar 373's fire control frequency within 5 seconds of the code transmission. The directed search the battery had been executing was degraded within those 5 seconds to the effectiveness level that the maximum output produced. But the cue itself, whatever had triggered the directed search, was not a radar return. It was an information report from somewhere in the air defense architecture that had produced enough confidence in a possible track that the Bavar 373's engagement controller had authorized a directed search. A directed search authorization meant a track report somewhere. The mission commander had 3 minutes to the initial point. He did not have 3 minutes to determine the source of the track report. He had 3 minutes to reach the initial point. The source of the track report became clear at 12:59 p.m., 90 seconds from the initial point, when the signal's intelligence feed showed an emission from a system the pre-mission database had not flagged as a significant factor. A mobile radar unit, a small vehicle-mounted system of the type that the IRGC use for perimeter surveillance at high-value facilities, had activated on the plateau above the underground facility itself. The perimeter surveillance radar was not part of the integrated air defense network. It was a facility-level security system. Its emission frequency was outside the bands that the EW package had been allocated against. Its antenna height was too low and its power output was too limited to generate a weapons-quality track on an aircraft at altitude. What it could do, and what it had apparently done, was detect an anomaly in the electromagnetic environment above the plateau, the specific signature of a stealth aircraft's engine exhaust interacting with the radar's low-power beam at a range that was inside the surveillance radar's detection envelope for large, slow objects, but at the absolute edge of its envelope for fast, high-altitude objects, and report the anomaly through the facility's internal security communications, which connected to the regional air defense net through a secondary reporting channel the target folder had documented, but whose current operational status had been assessed as inactive. The secondary reporting channel was active. The anomaly report had traveled from the perimeter surveillance radar through the facility security communications to the regional sector controller in 42 seconds. The sector controller had forwarded it to the Bavar 373 engagement controller as an unconfirmed possible contact. The Bavar 373 engagement controller had authorized the directed search. The directed search was now being jammed by maximum growler output. The Bavar 373 could not clean up the anomaly report into a confirmed track under maximum jamming. The initial point was 70 seconds away. The facility perimeter surveillance radar was still active. It was still producing the low-confidence anomaly return that had started the sequence. It was outside the EW package's allocated frequency coverage. The mission commander had the land-based EW assets, reserve allocation, available, a pool of power that the planning had held for contingency use. He transmitted the reserve allocation code specifying the perimeter radar's frequency band. The land-based asset received the code and began redirecting reserve power to the new target frequency. The redirection required 11 seconds to reach effectiveness. The initial point was 63 seconds away when he transmitted the code. The reserve power would reach effectiveness at 52 seconds before the initial point. 11 seconds of continued perimeter radar operation. 11 seconds of continued anomaly reporting through the secondary channel. 11 seconds during which the Bavar 373's engagement controller was receiving continued, though jammed, fire control returns and an active anomaly report from a source he could not silence. At 52 seconds before the initial point, the reserve allocation reached the perimeter surveillance radar's frequency, and the radar's output degraded into the noise floor. The anomaly reporting stopped. The Bavar 373's fire control radar was under maximum suppression, with no confirming report from any secondary source. The engagement controller looked at a jammed fire control picture with no corroborating contact information. His doctrine was unambiguous. Without corroborating contact information, a jammed fire control return below the confirmation threshold did not support engagement authorization. He had been at directed search for 6 minutes and 23 seconds. He had not produced a confirmed track. He logged the sequence and maintained directed search mode. He did not authorize engagement. The initial point was at 1 p.m. The bay doors opened. The GBU-57 released from the forward station. The aircraft corrected with the practiced pitch adjustment that the weapon's departure produced and turned onto the egress heading. Bay doors closed. The weapon's descent through the plateau surface and into the granite of the Mashhad highlands proceeded at the rate the geological survey had characterized for this formation. Dense, consistent, predictable in the way that well-consolidated granite is predictable, without the karst variations of the Gulf Coast, without the silty layers of the Semnon Formation, without the density anomalies that had triggered in-flight corrections in previous missions. The granite was uniform through the penetration sequence. The fusing algorithm found no anomalies to adjust for. The fuse threshold was met at 44 meters, 2 meters below the design detonation point, at the upper edge of the confidence interval rather than the lower edge. 2 meters deeper than design in dense granite placed the detonation inside the facility's primary operations floor rather than in the rock above it, inside rather than above. The kill mechanism analysis had established inside as the preferred outcome. Inside was the outcome. The overpressure that the detonation generated inside the primary operations floor was not survivable by the equipment the floor housed. The server arrays that hosted the offensive tool development pipeline, the processing infrastructure that analyzed the signal's intelligence feed, the communication systems that maintained the command channels to the implants in adversary networks, the workstations of the operators who had been running penetration campaigns against American military logistics systems for 14 months. All of it experienced the pressure event simultaneously. The precision-cooled environment that the facility's designers had built to protect sensitive electronics from the granite's ambient temperature was, at the moment of the detonation, a containment that concentrated the overpressure rather than venting it. The equipment did not survive containment. At 1:01 p.m., the Regional Signals Intelligence Collection Network that had been monitoring the Mashhad facility's outbound traffic, the encrypted command channels to the implants, the operational communications, the internal systems management traffic that any active computing infrastructure generates, noted a cessation. Complete, instantaneous. Not the gradual degradation of a system going through a planned shutdown sequence. The cessation that a sudden power loss produces when the power infrastructure and the systems running on it and the facility housing both of them are simultaneously subjected to a physics event that does not negotiate with orderly shutdown procedures. The collection network logged the cessation at 1:01 p.m. and transmitted the log to the planning element monitoring the mission. The planning element cross-referenced it against the weapons employment timeline. The cessation at 1:01 p.m. was 1 minute and 9 seconds after the weapon had reached the facility at 1 p.m. The propagation delay between weapon impact and signal cessation. The cross-reference confirmed the outcome. The implants that the facility had been commanding remained in place. They did not disappear. They went quiet in the specific way that a well-designed implant goes quiet when it loses contact with its command infrastructure. Dormant, waiting for reconnection, maintaining their positions in the networks they had been placed inside. They would wait for reconnection that would not come in any timeline that mattered. An implant without a command infrastructure is not a weapon. It is a dormant piece of code inside a network that does not know the organization. Managing it no longer exists in any functional form. The cleanup of those implants, the discovery and removal of access that the facility had spent years cultivating, would be a separate program, already underway, already in progress, whose timeline would be accelerated by the disruption to the command infrastructure that the Mashhad facility had provided. The B-2 reached its post-strike tanker rendezvous at 3:17 p.m. The transfer completed in 17 minutes. The aircraft turned west. The confirmation code had been in the planner's hands since 1:02 p.m. The Mashhad sector alert controller, monitoring a sector whose Bavar 373 had been in directed search mode for 9 minutes without producing a confirmed track and whose perimeter radar had gone inexplicably silent at 52 seconds before a seismic event, that the regional monitoring network would log as a 1.8 magnitude event at 1 p.m., underground, directional, at a depth inconsistent with natural seismic activity in the formation, would spend the next 40 minutes determining what had happened. His determination would be correct. His ability to undo it would not exist. The numbers that closed the package: 14 hours and 8 minutes of flight time, 1 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator in a single pass, 1 facility perimeter, surveillance radar outside the pre-mission EW allocation that detected an electromagnetic anomaly and reported it through a secondary channel assessed as inactive, active. 42 seconds from the perimeter radar's anomaly, detection to the Bavar 373's directed search authorization. 11 seconds of reserve EW allocation, reallocation required to silence the perimeter radar, transmitted at 63 seconds before the initial point, effective at 52 seconds before it. 1 engagement controller who maintained directed search for 9 minutes without a confirmed track and correctly refused engagement authorization without corroborating contact information. Detonation at 44 meters, 2 meters deeper than design, inside the primary operations floor. 0 aircraft lost. The Mashhad cyber operations facility was eliminated. The implants in adversary networks went dormant. The capability that had been threatening American military logistics networks for 14 months ceased to exist as an active operational program at 1 p.m. on a day that looked from 11 kilometers away in a city of 4 million people, exactly like every other day. The most consequential effects in the modern battlespace do not always announce themselves. A network that loses its command infrastructure does not send a message. It goes quiet. The quiet is the signal. 14 months of increasingly sophisticated intrusions against military logistics networks ended at 1 p.m. without any of the organizations that had been defending against those intrusions knowing why. The quiet was the signal. Those who were waiting for the signal understood it. The granite above the operations floor holds the silence. The networks below their former operators hold only dormant code.